Dr. Heather Sandison is a renowned naturopathic doctor specializing in neurocognitive medicine and the founder of Solsari Health Clinic, which is San Diego's premier brain optimization clinic, and Marama. It's the first residential memory care facility to have the goal of returning cognitively declined residents to independent living. She has dedicated her career to supporting those suffering with dementia and is the primary author of a peer-reviewed research, Observed Improvement in Cognition during a Personalized Lifestyle Intervention in People with Cognitive Decline, which was published in the Journal of Alzheimer's Disease. Dr. Sandison holds an annual online Reverse Alzheimer's Summit where she shares cutting-edge, tried-and-true insights into what is possible for those suffering with dementia. She's excited to shatter the common misconceptions about Alzheimer's and share what she has learned about keeping your brain sharp at any age. Here's a clip from today's show.
And so you just would kind of anticipate decline and hope for the best for their loved ones and tell them to get the support that they needed. Maybe measure the decline month over month or 6 months over 6 months. When Dr. Bredesen suggested that it was possible to do something about this, he was essentially packaging what I'd learned in naturopathic medicine. It was detox protocol. It was the functional medicine sort of ideas around bioidentical hormone replacement. It was nutrient balancing. It was finding infections and fighting them. It was the diet and lifestyle management of getting plenty of exercise, prioritizing sleep, stress management, and of course, exercise and a ketogenic diet. So Dr. Bredesen, when he suggested this, I was like, okay, I get the concept. If you stack all these things on top of each other, then we'll get this shift in the function at the cellular level. And that what we should expect is healing. We should expect recovery of the cognitive decline that's been happening for these patients.
Hey everyone, just a quick break to show some gratitude to our sponsors and give you some special deals. BrainMD nutraceuticals are high-quality supplements specifically designed to support and enhance brain health. Developed by Dr. Daniel Amen and his team of experts, these supplements use carefully selected ingredients backed by scientific research to promote cognitive function, mood stability, and overall mental wellness. BrainMD's commitment to purity and efficacy assures that their supplements provide targeted nutrition for the optimal brain performance and long-term brain health. Be sure to click my link in the show notes. Well, thank you so much again for being on today, Dr. Sanderson. I appreciate it very much.
It's such a privilege to be here. Thanks for having me, Wendy.
Well, I know that you have a new book that's about to come out while we're recording this, and so that's a little bit what we're here to talk about. But why don't you tell my listeners a little bit about yourself, maybe what you currently do and how you ended up doing what you're doing?
Sure, yeah. So in 2017, I was trained by Dr. Dale Bredesen. I had seen him at a conference, an integrative mental health conference, and he had suggested that you could reverse the symptoms of Alzheimer's. And I had been told, like most providers over the years in my training by very smart, very well-meaning, very well-educated people, that it wasn't possible to do anything for an Alzheimer's patient, that you could just hopefully make them more comfortable. There were some medications out there, but they didn't work very well. And so you just would kind of anticipate decline and hope for the best for their loved ones and tell them to get the support that they needed. Maybe measure the decline month over month or 6 months over 6 months. When Dr. Bredesen suggested that it was possible to do something about this, he was essentially packaging what I'd learned in naturopathic medicine. It was detox protocols. It was the functional medicine sort of ideas around bioidentical hormone replacement. It was nutrient balancing. It was finding infections and fighting them. It was the diet and lifestyle management of getting plenty of exercise, prioritizing sleep, stress management, and of course, exercise and a ketogenic diet. So Dr. Bredesen, when he suggested this, I was like, okay, I get the concept. If you stack all these things on top of each other, then we'll get this shift in the function at the cellular level. And that what we should expect is healing. We should expect recovery of the cognitive decline that's been happening for these patients. And although conceptually it made sense, I wasn't fully bought in because I'd heard the refrain so many times. There's nothing you can do. There's nothing you can do. There's nothing you can do. And so I was in this conflict, right? Where I was like, okay, it makes sense, but I've heard you can't do it. So I signed up for his training. And then once I was trained, I was on his list of providers. And this was right as his book, The End of Alzheimer's, was coming out. And so I had a bunch of people showing up in my clinical practice who had much more confidence in this approach than I did. And they proved to me what was possible. They showed me that even severe Alzheimer's could get better. And I also saw many, many patients who, and I still to this day, once a week we have someone comes in who says, I got my mom back, or I'm no longer forgetting words. I remember the names of my neighbors. I remember the thing that I went to grab in the other room. I don't have that brain fog anymore. We hear these stories over and over and all the time. This is what we expect now. The exception is when people are not improving. And then I appreciate Dr. Bredesen so much because he's like, Heather, just bring me whatever's not working and let's go through it and let's figure out what we're missing, because there's some piece of the puzzle that we're missing. So through Dr. Bredesen's work, I had the privilege of seeing patients in my clinical practice after being trained by him. And then patients were asking me the question, if I do this, or their loved ones especially were asking, if I do this for my mom or my dad, if I take the time off work, if I put in the effort, if we spend the money that it takes to do all of this, how likely is it to work? And we didn't know at that stage. This was in 2018, 2019. And so I was really fortunate to get a grant to study this and do a clinical trial in my office. And what we showed was that with the 6-month intervention, 74% of our participants with mild cognitive impairment, with measurable cognitive impairment, improved their MoCA scores, or their Montreal Cognitive Assessment, as well as another cognitive test called the Cambridge Brain Sciences Battery of Cognitive Assessments. And we also saw improvements in quality of life and in sleep and in many other factors, including their diabetes management, blood pressure, and their depression, their quality of life, but their mood and sleep in particular. So really exciting. I had the opportunity to study it, the opportunity to see patients in person, and then also was granted the opportunity to start an inpatient residential care facility for people suffering with memory impairment. And what we're trying to do there is shift memory care to memory recovery. And now we have 2 locations, one here in San Diego County and another in Wichita, Kansas.
Oh, I'm super excited about the Wichita, Kansas. I didn't realize there was one more in the Midwest, too. I just thought there was the one in the California location. That's awesome. That's great.
We have 2 now. Yeah, actually, Wichita has been open now for a year, and we've had the first 5 residents there now go through 6 months, a solid 6 months, and 4 of the 5 improved their cognition.
Oh, that's great. Well,
Really
I was definitely very familiar with Dr. Dale Bredesen, and then when I saw you as well, I was glad to see that more people are jumping on that bandwagon and really doing something and taking action about it. Because, I too, I'm still young in the game and new in the whole healthcare space, but I do think a lot of people, with a lot of health things in general, they think they get this diagnosis and they're stuck with it and there's nothing they can do. But especially when it comes to Alzheimer's and dementia, I think it's unfortunate that a lot of people are left to feel like that is the hole that they are now in, and there's nothing that they can do. So it's wonderful to hear that people are taking action and showing people that you can do things to dramatically improve or even reverse things like this.
Yeah, and that's actually why I wrote the book, is because so many people are told there's nothing you can do. Still, I have patients show up in my office and they're like, we went to see neurology. They said, get your affairs in order. There's nothing we can do. And there are these new medications. They just don't work very well. I really hope that these are first generation, the monoclonal antibody therapies by IV. They have high risk of brain swelling and brain bleeding, and they just delay the progress of the disease. So they make that. They basically draw out a torturous process. You need to start when you have more mild cognitive impairment, and they don't get anyone better. They just delay the rate of progression. And so as much as I'm excited about the pharmaceutical solutions on the horizon, at the moment, there is not a meaningful pharmaceutical intervention that helps support people getting better. However, that being said, there is so much you can do. It's almost overwhelming, hence why the book. There are so many things that we can do to modify our risk, to change the outcomes, to delay the onset, to prevent altogether. and to even reverse the cognitive decline associated with Alzheimer's. And so really what it comes down to is, okay, how do I do it, right? How do I put this into practice? There is enough science. Yes, we always want more, but there's enough science to take on these healthy lifestyle practices to get that impact, to get those outcomes for your cognition as you age.
Especially when, now that we know what we know and more comes to light every day, medications can be very helpful in a lot of situations, not just for Alzheimer's, but for anything really. But there's also so many risks and things that go along with side effects that go along with it. And I don't think that enough people really think about the side effects that could go along with it, or how, yes, it may improve one area, but then it's going to decrease 3 other areas of your life, and you really need to know the full gamut before. And, like you said, there's some simple things that you can do. Again, I try to tell people too, anytime you change any lifestyle habit, there's simple things you can do, but it's never going to be easy, because we have to kind of train our brain and our habits to really start to redo things again and relearn things that will help us. So I think that's the biggest obstacle people probably have to overcome, that you notice as well.
Yeah, absolutely. What we see is that there's many ways to help to support behavior change. And we offer coaching programs for people all over the world, because there is a big shift in identity when you get a diagnosis, and it's often the catalyst for dramatic behavior change. It's not for everyone. There are going to be some people who are like, I'll just wait for the pill, I'll just wait for the easy button, and I'm okay. I want to indulge. Basically, I have been looking forward to my retirement. I want to hang out on the couch. I don't want to be pushed too hard. I want to eat what I want to eat and enjoy life, and that's okay. The crime, I think, is when people aren't told that there's another alternative, that there is an option to put in the work, to put in the effort, and to make those shifts so that you and your loved ones can optimize cognitive function at any stage. And so then, as you mentioned, this can be challenging. Behavior change is hard for anyone, even when you're young and even when you have full cognitive capacity, let alone as we age, get stuck in our ways, and we're declining cognitively. So it takes community. We see that when people are in group coaching programs, they tend to do a lot better. I can tell someone over and over again, getting into ketosis is going to be so great for your brain. You're going to notice so many benefits. But when they watch it happen to someone else, that is an entirely different experience, an entirely different motivator. And so we see that the community, the groups, both at Marama in our residential care facility, and then also in the online groups, that is highly effective. And then we also see that some hand-holding, right? Like weekly coaching, getting together regularly, having a real relationship with the provider, rather than just those 7 minutes every 6 months, where you really feel known and seen and understood, especially the complex dynamics in families. We'll often see a husband and a wife plus their 2 adult children. Sometimes it's a granddaughter usually involved. So there's multiple generations, multiple people, sometimes a caregiver, a paid caregiver, a neighbor, someone else who loves and adores that person and wants to see them do well. So there's a lot of people invested, but there's also complex dynamics in those relationships and in the constraints that come up. Sometimes it's mobility. Someone can't walk that well, or they're a fall risk. Sometimes it's financial. Sometimes it's time. There are lots of things that pop up as we age, and then finding that group of people who's going to care for us or for our loved one, and then getting that collaboration to make these things possible is really helpful. And if you're in prevention mode, we've probably heard this, and I know you in nutrition and in lifestyle medicine, we become the average of the 5 people we spend the most time with, right? We've all heard that adage, and I'm not exactly sure where the research came from, but I originally heard it from Tony Robbins. It's like, oh, that makes so much sense. All those people that I spend time with, I adopt their vernacular, right? I start to talk like them. I'm eating like them. I'm exercising like them, or not. I'm going to bed around the same time. And so choosing those people wisely as we age. Who is it that we want to age like? Who do we want to be? And James Clear, his book about habits is such a great one to go back to over and over. It's like, what is our identity, right? If our identity is that we go into ketosis with some regularity, or that we exercise 6 days a week, then when we start to take a break from that, it feels like there's a conflict with our identity. And that helps us to maintain these healthy patterns over time.
I'd like to think I'm heading towards definitely that prevention for anything. I want to maintain as much of my health and longevity and wellness for as long as possible. And I want to age gracefully. And, I want to be able to lift a box, when I'm 90 and 100, and I plan on living to 120. So I just find myself, surrounding myself with the people that do want to not just sit on the couch all day, although I do enjoy sitting watching Netflix, just like the next person. But at the same time, I want to continue to work my brain and my body and things so it can function and last me until whenever the end it actually is.
Yeah, so it can be meaningful and fulfilling as long as we're around, so that you can hang out with grandkids and great-grandkids and enjoy them. That's really the point of it all. I hear so often from my elderly patients when we engage them and ask about stressors, but also about what are you most proud of? What are your happiest memories? And so often it's those relationships with their children, with their spouse, with their siblings. It's about relationships, good friends. And so we want to be present and available for those. And if we're going down the slippery slope of cognitive decline, we become a liability, not an asset in those relationships. And so the goal, yes, is to maintain vitality, maintain health, maintain cognitive capacity, and be able to show up in those really meaningful and fulfilling roles that we all have.
I know before we started recording, I was just telling you how I currently work at the Amen Clinics during my day job. And one of the things that I find really kind of shocking and sad, but also I'm very glad at the same time, is that, people in their 50s, which is my age, are going to get scanned and they're finding that, oh my goodness, I better start really attacking what looks like it could be leading down that Alzheimer's and dementia road now, because things are not looking like they should be or they could be. And so, again, I think it's really sad because they're only in their 50s, but I think that people really don't realize that there are symptoms that can start even well before that. They can last for a lot of years.
You get these pathophysiological changes happening in the brain decades before you have any symptoms. And so there's what's the good part about that, I think, that you're alluding to, is that there's this huge opportunity for prevention, right? For addressing this earlier on, when it's much easier, when it's more of a biological process versus a structural process or biochemical process versus structural. Before all those plaques and tangles have built up in the brain and there's true neurodegeneration, there's biochemical kind of dysregulation. And that's much easier to address. Now, we've seen, I will never tell anyone there's not hope, because I have seen the impossible happen. I have seen miracles happen. I have seen things I thought were absolutely out of this world. And so I will never, I've learned the hard way to suggest that there's no hope. I will be proven wrong. And yet we also see much more consistently, it's in those earlier stages when people are younger, yes, in their 50s and 60s, when they start addressing brain health then, or even in your 40s. Dr. Bredesen calls it the cognoscopy, right? Just like we're suggested that we get a colonoscopy to check for those early stages of colon cancer, why shouldn't we be looking at our brain, our most valuable, precious organ, to see if there are signs or modifiable risk factors when it comes to developing dementia? And start at 45, start at 40. If you know that you have a biological or like a genetic predisposition, so if you have a structural genetic predisposition or family history, get tested even younger for these things. Make sure there aren't heavy metals or mold toxins or chemical toxicity. Make sure that if you have herpes or gingivitis or Lyme or any COVID, that you're allowing your brain to fully recover from those infections and you're keeping them at bay as much as possible. That you're optimizing nutrients based on functional medicine perspectives and genetic predisposition. That you're protecting your brain from traumatic brain injuries. That you're protecting your sleep from sleep apnea, that we're addressing all of these things that we can. We can't change the year you were born, and certainly our risk for dementia goes up with age. We can't change whether you're born male or female, and certainly females are at higher risk for developing dementia. And we can't change your genetics. We can't change your ApoE status, but there are so many other things that we can change, that we do have control over. And so the earlier we find out what our risk is, the more chance we have to make a dent in how that manifests.
Well, maybe you could share some simple tips for improving brain health, because then maybe that'll give people a little hope of, okay, what can I do to start today?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think through this as the brain health. Brain is a complex organ, and Dr. Bredesen puts it like think of your brain as a country, my brainistan, that if you're focused on fighting a war, if you're protecting or defending, then you shouldn't be building infrastructure, roads and schools, right? We want to finish that off. We want to get rid of the toxins. We got to get rid of the infections so that we can focus on regeneration, on building new neurons, on creating new connections or synapses between them. And so when we think through brain health, what we're looking for is imbalance, too much, too little, in the wrong place or at the wrong time. And there's essentially 6 finite areas that are causal level. I've already mentioned toxins. Nutrients are another one. Structure, which includes genetics or macro structure like traumatic brain injuries, obstructive sleep apnea, but also ApoE status, PSEN1, PSEN2, APP. These are early onset Alzheimer's genetics. Those structural components make a difference. Sleep apnea, if I haven't mentioned that, I'm going to say it over and over again, because getting tested for sleep apnea is one of the most important things you can do to protect your brain health as you age. And then treating it, of course. Don't just get tested, but treat it. Mm-hmm. So toxins, nutrients, structure, stressors, too much or too little. We kind of referred to this as that I'm going to kick my feet up, have happy hour every day, indulge in desserts as I retire, go on cruises and just eat it all and not exercise much. That's too little stress. We need that meaning and purpose. We need that reason to get up out of bed. We need to get exercise. We need to stress the system so that it has more resilience. So we need a balanced amount of stress. And then infections. We talked a little bit about some infections that can contribute to, especially to triggering inflammation in the brain. And then signaling. We need enough of the signals going to the brain, whether it's from the muscle, from our ovaries or testicles, if sex hormones drive the signaling that tells our brain to create new neurons and connections between them. So does BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which comes from the muscles. So when we think through all 6 of these areas, toxins, nutrients, infections, structure, stressors, signaling, everyone listening, you might have heard there's some spot here where you're out of balance. And so this really is a choose your own adventure. When we did the clinical trial in my office, we had 23 participants and 17 of them improved their cognitive function. Not one of them did everything, but they all did something significant. They all did more than one thing, right? So when we start stacking these interventions on top of each other, that's when we see noticeable change. But I don't want anyone to feel so overwhelmed that they're like, oh my God, I have to do it all. And I can't, if I have to do it all, I can't do anything, right? That sort of overwhelm paralysis. And so that's really what the book is about, guiding you through. Where do you start? Hopefully something easy. Get that easy win. Start socializing again if you haven't been. Get out, get to church, or get to those Bible studies, or get to that bridge game. Get out and engage with others. Find maybe a volunteer work, something engaging, something that is going to exercise your brain and keep you from checking out, but also not so hard that you're going to give up. When it comes to exercise, we recommend dual task exercise. So this is where we're exercising cognitively at the same time as physically. And we get much more benefit for our brain when we do that than if we just do one or the other separately. And so this might be as simple as walking and talking, or it could be going to a class like yoga or Pilates or Zumba or aerobics, or something where you're cued by an instructor and you have to keep up with the steps and, okay, right hand, left leg, what? That kind of thing will keep us on our toes, and it keeps us engaged cognitively and physically at the same time. There's great research out of Pacific Neuroscience Institute up at here in California, in Santa Monica. They've published extensively about how beneficial this can be for the brain. And I mentioned sleep. If you or your partner snores, if you wake up feeling tired and not fully rested, test for sleep apnea. And there are the technology has really improved so that you can do at-home sleep studies now They're not the gold standard. It's still better to go for an overnight sleep study if you are concerned about that. However, they're so much more accessible nowadays. They're less expensive, and it's a much lighter lift to get someone to do an at-home sleep study with a watch and a ring than it is to go into an overnight sleep study and be hooked up to all the electrodes, be sleep deprived that night, need a ride home the next morning. That's quite an undertaking. So if you can get one of these at-home sleep studies, I highly recommend it because it'll rule in sleep apnea sometimes, most of the time. And that will give people access to more of the treatment options, right? Whether it's a mouth guard or even mouth taping can be helpful. If you have mild sleep apnea, just mouth tape alone can be very, very helpful and help you to get oxygen to your brain at night. So what's happening when you have sleep apnea is that you're becoming hypoxic. You have low levels of oxygen in the blood because your airway isn't open, so you can't get oxygen into your lungs. And then you're starving your brain of oxygen at night. And night after night, when you do this, it makes the quality of your sleep go down. So you have less sleep generally, but also less REM sleep and less deep sleep. And REM sleep is really important so that we can process the memories, right? So we can store the memories. Also, it takes the emotional bite out of them so that we feel emotionally recovered. We aren't so triggered if we think of that memory of a tough conversation or something that happened a few days ago. So we need that REM sleep for kind of helping our stressors as well as for consolidating memory. Now we need deep sleep because it literally is when we rinse, the lymphatic system pulses at night and during deep sleep, and it helps us to get the amyloid plaques out of the brain. We know that just one night of sleep deprivation for someone in their 20s, 30s, 40s increases the measurable amount of amyloid plaque in the cerebral spinal fluid. Just one night. So you can imagine that over decades, this is very significant in terms of increasing our risk for dementia. So optimizing sleep, both quality and quantity, by either testing it or just making some moves and prioritizing it, helping with sleep hygiene, giving yourself enough time. These are really, really important pieces. I mean, there's so many directions to go, but I think sleep is a great one because who doesn't want more and better sleep, right? And then once you're rested in the morning, now you can make better dietary choices. You can have the energy to go get the exercise, the energy to socialize. Those kinds of things become a little easier if we get a win on sleep.
It definitely does change your mood, which you're then feeling more interested to just tackle some of the other things as well. Even just doing the laundry, you'll feel a little more motivated to do the simple things like laundry.
Absolutely. And then engaging in relationships, right? We're less irritable. We're more present. Yeah. More creative.
Yeah. Sleep is one of my favorite things, and probably one of the biggest things that I talk to with my clients about. And I find that a lot of people just think that, oh, it's okay, I only got 4 or 5 hours, every night. And I'm like, oh my goodness, that's not enough. Because like you said, your body, and I tell people it's like your body literally has to go through a car wash. And if it can't go through that car wash, you keep all that dirt on your car, which is your brain, night after night after night, and it's got to get out of there. And when I started doing my podcast, the very first person that I had air was Dr. Perry Nicholson, and he's huge in the lymphatic system, and he has the big 6. And the very first, one of the things he says is that one of the biggest places that you have the biggest pockets of lymph is right here by your neck, which is right behind your ear, basically, for those that are listening. And if you have a blockage there, all that stuff is going to just stay in your head and in your brain. So he's like, what does that tell you when you have one of the largest pockets of all the lymph nodes right there by your brain? It probably means that it's pretty important that you get that lymph cleared out on a regular basis. I'm like, yeah, that's a great way to really think about that too. And even if you're getting good sleep, if your lymph and everything are blocked and clogged, it's not going to help you with the whole process. You need to get it out, detoxified, and literally out of your system and out of your body as well.
Yeah, I mean, that's also such a fun kind of path to go down is the detox. Like, what can we do for detox? So all of our cells basically eat and poop every day, right? Like we have metabolic waste coming out of every single cell. And then, unfortunately, we live in a toxic world. We test people for metals and mold toxins and chemicals, and nobody has none. Especially as we age, we've had this lifetime to accumulate them. And then if on top of it we're constipated, or we don't drink enough water, or we don't get enough sleep, or we don't sweat, now it's harder for our body to get rid of them, or if we don't take deep breaths. And so just going back to these natural organs of elimination, our body is designed to get toxins out because our ancestors had to deal with this too, right? There were toxins in the environment. And again, every cell is designed to take in nutrients and then let go of metabolic waste. And so many of us have suppressed sweating because we go from our 73-degree house to our 68-degree car to our, 69-degree office, and we're not going to Canada in the winter and sitting in the snow, and we're not going to Arizona in the summer. We have gotten into these really tight temperature zones. And so again, kind of like the ketogenic diet, it's a fasting mimicking diet, this hormetic effect, this idea that when we stress the system, we actually get more resilient. So we can apply that, particularly not for frail people who have later stage Alzheimer's, but when we're in our 40s, 50s, 60s, when we're looking at prevention, okay, how do I turn up the ability of my body's natural detox processes? And sweating is a great way to do it. We create more resilience, it's great for our nervous system, and we get the benefit of detoxifying. So I know you said you're in Wisconsin. My mom's family is from northern Minnesota, and we go there often in the summers, not in the winters. I've actually never been in there in the winter. I have no idea what it's like. I grew up in the tropics, but when I've been there in the summers, everybody's got a sauna, and it's this social thing. And the Scandinavian culture, getting in saunas is associated with a decreased risk of dementia. And there's multiple factors. Part of it is probably the socialization, the social aspect. But the other, certainly a very important aspect, is how much we sweat, how many toxins we can get rid of through our sweat. And if you're someone who, for whatever reason, is more sedentary because of an injury or because of any sort of constraints with movement and exercise, getting your heart rate up by just getting the temperature up is a way to sort of approximate exercise and then, of course, get the benefit of sweating. So sweating, moving our skin. You mentioned lymph. This is like where it gets very spa. We can talk, this is why I love it, is because it's almost like going to the spa, right? You have your dry skin brushing. You have castor oil packs. There are great herbs that help move the lymphatics. There's also lymphatic massage, the chi machine, or the vibration plates. There's a lot of different ways to get your lymphatics moving, and many of them are very relaxing as well. Great for the nervous system, great for balancing that sympathetic, parasympathetic. If I have patients, if you're not sleeping and you're not having a bowel movement, those are the places we start. And so moving our bowels every day, I made the mistake early in my career of asking people if they have normal bowel movements. And for some people, once every 7 days is normal. And from my naturopathic perspective, you mentioned like the brain. If the brain isn't getting rinsed out, then that stuff that dirt is staying on your brain. Well, if we don't move our bowels, our body is so wise and so intelligent, and our ancestors certainly had fewer resources than we do these days, fewer caloric resources available 365 days a year nowadays. But back then, there were periods of fasting. It was very expensive to make cholesterol. It was very expensive to find food from a resource perspective. And so our bowels are designed to reabsorb and recycle a lot of things, including bile. And bile contains toxic sludge. So if we don't move our bowels every day, the enterohepatic recirculatory system is basically taking that trash that your liver took out yesterday, reabsorbing it, and sending it back to the liver to have to process all of that again. And so now it's processing today's trash on top of yesterday's trash if we don't have that daily bowel movement. So it's very, very important that that's happening. And I recommend anyone who struggles with any constipation to talk to a doctor or a provider, a health coach, somebody about how to make sure that that's happening. There's lots of different ways to get at that depending on what's happening for you. But then just drinking clean filtered water. Spring water is what I highly recommend. Most water is contaminated these days, but getting either a great filter, findaspring.com is a way to find spring water, and then not drinking out of plastic, but finding glass or ceramic or stainless containers is what I recommend there. So we've talked about bowels. We've talked about skin and lymph. We've talked about kidneys with good filtered water. There's also the liver, which requires nutrients, good nutrients for phase 1 and phase 2 detox support. The body is so incredible. It will actually stop phase 1 detoxification if you don't have enough nutrients to get through phase 2. And so having the nutrients like N-acetylcysteine, B vitamins, you can use some herbs that help to give enough nutrients to the liver. Also glutathione. These things will help your body to get through both phase 1 and phase 2 liver detox. The intermediate step often is more toxic than that initial toxin that we took in. And so the body's trying to protect you oftentimes when it slows down detox. So we want to make sure there's an abundant amount of all of those nutrients that are so good for the liver available. And then breath, we control the pH of our body through our breath. When we go through a stop, right? If a cop thinks that we might have been drinking, they use a breathalyzer. This is because we exhale toxicity, the toxicity associated with drinking alcohol. And so this is we can use this. It's, I think, the least used organ of elimination is our lungs, and how there are breathwork practices from all over the world, indigenous practices, practices that people have done for millennia that are really helpful in increasing the detox pathway through the lungs. But also, again, many of these things are very helpful for the nervous system. So we can reduce the toxic stressor, the toxin of cortisol, when we can get our body back into balance, whether it's through breath, through moving the lymphatics, through sweating and detox, or just, keeping things flowing.
Yeah. Since we're talking about detoxifying things, what are some brain nourishing environments, and why do they matter? Because I don't think people really give their environment enough thought about how that's impacting their overall health, definitely not their brain health.
Yeah. And what's so wild is when you start to think about it and you start to recognize kind of what's going on when you walk into different environments, right? Like we can all imagine walking into a room where your high school best friends are there, people that or your college best friends, whoever you're really attached to and like feel, you're so excited to see. And you walk in and, you're in some like lovely getaway, maybe a weekend away with some girlfriends, and it just feels good, and you're funny and you're on it, and you feel sharp probably, unless you've had too much to drink with them, too much wine, right? But and then versus walking into like a strained environment where maybe there's someone who's sick or ill, or maybe it's like in-laws are often a place where people feel uncomfortable. There's tension, or maybe with a sibling. You walk into a room and maybe it's cluttered, or there's stuff everywhere on the countertops, or things are piling up, and maybe there's dogs running in and out, and there's the smell of the animals, and then there's the noise of the collar jingling, right? We can imagine, and then the TV's on, and there's the whistles of a sports game or an announcer. And just imagine yourself in those two different scenarios, and how does your brain work? Right? When you can kind of think like, oh yeah, when I'm stressed and I'm irritated and I'm distracted, it doesn't work as well. I'm not going to learn anything. I'm not open. I'm in defense mode. Whereas when you're relaxed, when you're happy, when you're in a good mood, you're more open. You're more open to new ideas. We're more open to many things. So that just kind of simple example, but there's so many directions to go here, right? Clutter. I mentioned clutter. Clutter can be very hard on the nervous system. If we look around and we see surfaces that are full of stuff, it's almost like a to-do list that just is constantly irritating our brain. When we clean it up, clean it out, many people have this experience, like when you go to sell a car or you sell a house and you get everything off the countertops, or you finally detail your car and you're like, oh, I actually really like this car, or this house feels really good now, right? That feeling when things are less cluttered, we want to be there. Our nervous system calms down. So clutter is a great one, and I recommend don't take the whole house on at once. Start with one room, maybe the room that you spend the most time in. And if you're working with someone, a loved one who's already struggling with dementia, this can be really hard because they're often attached to things. They might forget that things have been moved. And so we'll help people take pictures of things, and then maybe they go into storage, or maybe they go to a loved one, they get inherited by somebody early. And then we just label where they are just to help them with that transition. There's so many things to talk about. The kitchen is its own deal. Like just getting non-toxic cleaning products out, getting plastic out of the kitchen, making sure your ceramics, like whatever you're using, doesn't have lead in it, that you're not being exposed to. Certainly, plastic is one of the biggest things in the kitchen, but also nonstick. Any of the nonstick pots and pans, we try to get rid of those. I use only stainless or stainless cast iron or glass in the kitchen. So there's so many things to talk about when it comes to environment, but hopefully that gives you at least a starting point.
Yeah, that was one of my things I was going to hoping you were going to touch on was the environmental toxins in the kitchen, because I know it was I want to say it was about 2 years ago or so, my husband and I saw the movie and the documentary called, and I can never remember which is the documentary and which is the name of the movie, but one is called Dark Waters, and the other one is called The Devil We Know, and it's all about the story about Teflon and how the nonstick and how that came about, and the aftermath and the things that they knew were still going on and that were contributing to people's health, and it was still allowed to be sold. And nowadays, technically, Teflon isn't sold, but it's all the same, formulation for making the same stuff nonstick. It's just not called Teflon anymore. And so, yeah, I'm with you. I just use stainless steel, the old school pans from the 50s that are just stainless steel, and that's it. Yep. And they're fantastic. I love them.
Yeah, so it takes a little adjusting because people are like, what if I burn stuff? I'm like, they turn it down to medium low and be patient. It just takes another minute.
Yeah.
But it's so much better than having nonstick end up in your food. I mean, it's just crazy. All of those stories. There was a recent ProPublica, I still have it open. In fact, I just went to look for it, article that my partner sent me. And it was the story of 3M and the toxic gaslighting of how executives convinced a scientist that the forever chemicals she found in human blood were safe. And this was just published May 20th. We're May 27th now, a week ago. And so we're seeing more and more and more of these stories. And you're absolutely right. It's like people talk about BPA. Oh, this is BPA free. But they use BPS or BPD or something else that hasn't been as well studied. And so I think that we get this false sense of security. Like, oh, it's not Teflon anymore. It's this other nonstick. And I don't buy it. I just do not feel, I would not let my daughter eat anything cooked. And what gets scary is, okay, well, what about when I'm out at a restaurant? What are they using? What seed oils are they using? What are they cooking in? We can't avoid all of it. And so it's just a matter of focusing when it feels overwhelming, focus back. What are my choices? What do I have control over? And how do I make the best choices possible for me and my loved ones with what I've got?
Right. Well, and to your point, my husband and I, for example, we eat out very rarely. And it's mainly because I don't want to cook one meal a week. So that's usually, or one day a week. So that's usually the day that we eat out. But every other meal, whether it's breakfast, lunch, dinner, it's something that we've made, it's leftovers or whatever. But yeah, I still try to make wise choices when we go out to eat. There's still ways that you can still make wise choices, and you can still enjoy yourself whether it's just you and your spouse or whether you're with a group of friends. There's still, I think, wise choices that you can make when you go out. But it is. I try not to think about what they're cooking it on, what they're cooking it with,
When you don't have control, it's not worth it, right? So, but choosing places and voting, right? Like voting with your dollars, that choosing to eat at restaurants that offer maybe something organic or that have products where they are clear, like we don't use seed oils or we don't use nonstick. You can ask, and the consumer will drive what's available.
And again, I don't think people definitely think about that either. They think, oh, that's what's on the menu. I have to order it that way. And maybe just ask them if they can cook it in real butter instead of the seed oil that they're probably going to cook it in. They might even accommodate you. I know there's someone in our family that, and I think there's probably in everybody's family, unfortunately, that's suffering from dementia or Alzheimer's. So I know that people can definitely understand, but there's always a caregiver involved. And so what kind of risks do you see that affect people the most when it comes to caregivers? Because I know that I just don't think that people think about that, especially when it's a husband and wife couple, or, just we use this as an example. The dad is left because the mom's already passed on, and now the kids are left. So one of the kids may be the caregiver. I don't think that they think about what impact that's going to make on the caregiver.
Yeah. So what the literature tells us, the science around this, is that caregivers are anywhere from 2.5 to 6 times more likely to be diagnosed with Alzheimer's later in their life compared to those who never serve as caregivers. The highest risk that we've seen published is in male spouses of a woman who has dementia. So the wife has dementia and the male partner is caring for her. That is where we see the 6x risk. So this risk is significant, and what we recommend is that caregivers, care partners, they engage in this life with the person they're caring for, right? And there's a few things. One, the first thing I tell a caregiver is you need 1 day off. That's a non-negotiable. You need 8 hours off per week. And many people, you'll see, they feel guilt, they feel shame, but nobody else can take care of my loved one as well as I can. They don't know them. They don't know her likes and dislikes, or they don't know what she's going to want to eat, or they're going to fight back. They don't want to be alone. I can't neglect her in that way. You can't not, because caregivers must have that time off for their own sanity. And I've seen so many families backed into the corner of the caregiver gets sick, breaks a hip, something happens, they get called away, their adult child needs them on the other side of the country. And then they're forced into this position where they've got to just find the quickest help who will show up, just a warm body to stay with their loved one. And now that person really doesn't know what they want, really doesn't know what they need, has no relationship with them. And so I highly, highly, highly recommend that if you are serving as a caregiver, a care partner for your loved one, make sure that you have help. This is not a one-person job. This is a multi-person job, and you don't know how long it's going to last. I have a 5-year-old. She is becoming more and more independent every day. When you have a loved one who's suffering with Alzheimer's, you don't know what tomorrow is going to bring. You don't know if it's going to last 5 years or 10 years or 15 years. And that is a job that it's a marathon. It requires sustainability. And having one person responsible for it is not sustainable. And so finding that help, finding that support, and then making sure that you are eating the great diet, that you are getting plenty of sleep, that you're prioritizing your exercise. And I see how challenging this can be. It's very, very, very hard to juggle. And we see again in the science that caregivers who don't prioritize their own health, their own sanity, they are not as good at caring for their partner. So usually the person in that caregiving role, they're already kind of leaning in the direction of martyr. And so I have to make it about the person they're caring for and be like, you have to take time off, because if you don't, you're going to be tired and you're not going to take as good care of him, right? We have to often frame it that way for these selfless caregivers. Otherwise, they'll just work themselves to the bone. They will put themselves at risk of developing dementia and of alienating other people and not having an identity outside of caregiving, which it's not healthy, right? It's important to have a balanced life.
Yeah, and I would imagine, especially for women, that's probably really hard to remove themselves from that caregiver role, even if it's for just that 8 hours, for example, to get away. Because, we're born, that's our job. We're supposed to caregive for our kids or, our spouse or something. We're the caregivers of the home usually. And so I would imagine that it's probably really hard for women especially to remove themselves for that 8 hours or taking care of themselves, especially when because I would imagine, when you get the diagnosis of dementia or Alzheimer's, it's already overwhelming. And, you've already got your own personal health things that you may or may not be going through. And now you have to deal with that as well. So to try to untangle all of that, especially when you're not at, and I was going to say Marama. Is it Marama?
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's exactly why we created Marama, because so many people were calling us and saying, hey, I really want this for my dad or my mom, but I can't do it all. I want them to have this great diet. I want them to be engaged all day. I want them to have a great exercise and community around them, but I can't like drop everything and drive them to all these things or do it myself. And so when I looked around, there wasn't a place offering an immersive experience in Dr. Bredeson's approach. And so that was why we created Marama. And sure enough, we see that people move in and many of them improve. And it's really wonderful and very fulfilling. And yet, ideally, long term, people would stay home and they would stay near their loved ones. They would never need to go to a place like Marama, never need memory care. But yeah, I think oftentimes people feel so stuck that they need to look into memory care because there's not a way for them to do it all. It's physically demanding to care for your loved one with dementia. It is emotional, very emotionally taxing, and it can be bankrupting, right? It's very, very expensive. And so my goal is that people will get ahead of this, and particularly the caregiver, right? Because who's going to take care of you? Yeah, I think it can be challenging for women, but I see men too who are just so dedicated, and it's so heartwarming and incredible and beautiful to see these relationships and just how dedicated people are to their loved ones. And there needs to be that balance that you need to show up for you too. And you're going to be a better caregiver if you put your health first. You have to put your own oxygen mask on first, right? Otherwise, you're not going to be available to help your loved one. You can't burn out. And so we see families often in these really impossible scenarios where there's no one right decision. And the dynamics in that family are totally different from the dynamics in another family. And so, I really feel for people who are in that conundrum of how do I care for my loved one who's got dementia? Do they go to memory care? Do we try to send them to Marama? Do we keep them at home? If we keep them at home, who's going to do it all? It's challenging. It's really challenging.
Well, let me ask you this. I know you've got the two centers, Marama's in Kansas, and then the one in California. Mm-hmm. Do you see, and I know that Marama is still kind of new. It's only within the last 5-6 years. Yeah. So it's still kind of new. Do you see possibly, or in the hopes anyways, in the future of having doctors like eventually around the country that will help? So there's a little more pockets that'll be part of your network that will kind of help. So in case people can't drive or stay in Kansas or can't stay in California, maybe so they can, I'm just thinking like if I lived here in Milwaukee area, Wisconsin area, and then I was able to, if you had a doctor that was in Chicago that I could go see on the regular if I was caring for my loved one and still get the same Marama experience as far as the help and then the knowledge and everything like that. Do you see anything like that?
So that exists. So Dr. Bredesen has trained over 2,000 providers around the world. And so you can Google now Bredesen trained providers, and you can go through the Apollo program. So Apollo Health is Dr. Bredesen's group. And once you've applied and gotten into the Apollo program, then they'll give you a list of providers in your area. And so there are health coaches, nurse practitioners, physician's assistants, naturopathic doctors, medical doctors, DOs, you name it. There are thousands of providers who are in that database and who have been trained. And so, yeah, that's absolutely available now.
Oh, that's great. That's great. I did not realize that. And I get the Apollo newsletter. I just signed up for that recently.
Oh, good.
But I been in school, and so I just graduated one course. So I'm just like, now that I'm out of school, I haven't had a chance to even pay attention.
Yeah. I'm so glad that we're here having this conversation, because it's one of those things. I live in this world. I'm like a dementia nerd, right? So I like have my blinders on. I just do my thing and work with my people and think about dementia all day, every day, and how to reduce the suffering associated with it. And then if somebody says, "Oh, are there doctors available?" and I go, "Of course there are." What? And you're like, you're not in this world every day. And I think that we see a lot of the families in that situation, like you just mentioned, Like someone gets diagnosed with dementia. Now, often families already kind of know. They're just in denial, right? We're all in denial because we've been told there's nothing you can do. And my hope is as we have these conversations, as we spread this information, people are looking for those signs earlier and they're getting help earlier because we have so much more confidence that we can help people the earlier we start. But you're absolutely right that many people will show up to an appointment and like, oh, dad was diagnosed with dementia. We've known for 3 years that he was declining, but he finally got that diagnosis because somebody took him. And now it's like, oh my gosh, I didn't ever want to know anything about this disease, but I feel like I should learn everything today because how are we going to help him? What are we going to do? And it's like a crash course that nobody ever wants to sign up for, to learn about how to best care for a loved one. And so my goal with the book is that more people get the benefit of Dr. Bredesen's work, that it feels accessible, that it feels doable. There's a lot of information out there, right? And these doctors know plenty of it, and there's lots of information. But when that information makes an impact is when it's implemented. We have to take the information and do something with it. We've got to schedule with the sleep doctor. We got to get the sleep study done. We've got to wear the CPAP. That's just one little piece of it. And we need to kind of evaluate what are the things that are most meaningful for me or for my loved one. And that takes time. And so the goal is when even in our coaching programs and in the book, it's like we have a schedule. What does your schedule look like for this week? What does it look like next week? Where is it that you can fit in the time that it's going to take to do this? Because it's something that needs to be implemented to have the impact. And so that we recognize that, we get it. And no one has extra time these days, right? We all feel a time scarcity, but it's so worth it. It's so worth it to have mom back for Christmas, to have, one more anniversary or one more birthday with someone who's fully cognizant, who's fully there, who can pick out a thoughtful gift or can, be present for the conversations, for the meaningful conversations. And so I encourage people who are suffering or who know someone who's suffering with dementia, pick up the book, give it a read. We'd love your feedback. And my hope is that it helps you to change your life in a way that shifts the trajectory of your health and the outcomes of your health so that you have a meaningful last hurrah, right? Like a fourth quarter of life, that those senior years are meaningful and fulfilling.
Yeah, well, and you have a lot of great reversing Alzheimer's coaching programs and brain health brain health workshops. I attended one of yours last year and it was fantastic. So I'm definitely looking forward to your Reversing Alzheimer's book, and I'm hoping it'll be on Amazon Audible because I love listening to Audible books.
Yeah, it's there. It's available. It'll be out June 11th.
Great. All right, perfect. Well, usually at the end of every episode, I like to ask my guests for their don't miss this moment to be kind of one takeaway. Hopefully, if the listeners remember anything, it's this one key thing. What would your don't miss this moment be?
Yeah, I think sleep apnea. Sleep apnea is a significant contributor to cognitive decline. So get a sleep study. If you have any inkling that there's snoring, that you're waking up not rested, that your sleep isn't optimized, get a sleep study done to protect your brain health.
Great. And where can, I will going to put a bunch of links in the show notes so people can find you and follow you and stuff, but why don't you tell them where they can find you and follow you and maybe sign up for the brain health workshops and things that you have also, or pre-order your book.
We'd love to have you. Yeah, drheathersandison.com. And my last name is spelled Sandison, Sandison.
Perfect. Well, and actually, now that we're talking, by the time this airs, your book will have just come out. So they won't have to worry about pre-ordering it. They'll just be able to get it right away.
Yeah, have one show up at your door. Wonderful. And pass it on. Please pass it on to your neighbor or friend or whoever might need it.
Great. Well, thank you so much for being on today.
Such a pleasure, Wendy. Thank you so much for having me.
If you are looking for a trustworthy place to choose all of your supplements, FullScript has 285 different brands to choose from. They did the work for you to check quality standards for all the supplements they carry. These standards are important because they help to ensure a product is safe, effective, and accurately labeled. FullScript uses third-party companies to provide unbiased assurance that certain quality criteria are met when they add a company or product to their inventory. When you set up an account with FullScript, use my link and you'll always get 15% off your supplements. If you want to continue learning and hearing all things nutrition for your mind, body, and soul, click like, subscribe, or favorite me on whatever podcast platform you use, or you can find me at ForgivenNutritionist.com. This podcast was designed to educate, inspire, and empower you to achieve your health and wellness goals. It is not meant to diagnose or treat any illness or medical condition or take the place of any treatments from your current healthcare providers.